It's Gavin here, and this video was graded with classic negative, which is actually a look of Fuji Superior film, but it wasn't shot on the X Pro 3 to get the classic negative look. I actually dug in and I made a lot to use in video like this. I made a preset for Lightroom and I made a style for Capture One that works on anything.
Ya perdí la cuenta de las veces que salí a buscarla y se esfumó. La busqué en los escenarios grandes, en los viejos discos de hip hop.
Fuji has this new classic negative, right? But guess what? It doesn't work on most of their cameras, much less on other RAW files. We can make this profile for anything. We can make this profile work on any RAW file, and we're gonna do it for Capture One for Lightroom. We're gonna make a LUT for it. And again, this is kind of following the theme of what I do with my Filmist presets, but this one's gonna be free. I'm just gonna make it and we're gonna throw it out there because I'm seeing a lot of people talk about this classic negative. Oh, like buy the new X Pro 3 because of classic negative. And I'm like, why would you buy a camera for a color profile? Like, there's literally zero reason a color profile can't be applied to everything. So we are going to match classic negative with a regular preset style LUT kind of thing. And it's gonna look amazing. Don't get me wrong, I like Fuji cameras. Like, I have one right here. If you like the X Pro 3, that's great. I mean, you know what? Every camera, to each his own. I think the design is badly engineered, the way the screen flips down, and well, I'm not gonna do a review on that. But if you love it, great. Use the camera that works for you. But here's the thing, I've been studying film a lot because this year in 2019, we did a ton of research to make the Filmist pack to reproduce all these different films from Kodak and Fuji and Agfa and all these cool films. And I learned a lot about how film works. I studied a lot of real film scans. And when this classic negative profile came out, and on a few cameras, it works in Capture One also. There's a profile in there for it. You can shoot it on the XP3, of course, and there may be an update coming for it to the XT3 in firmware. But the fact is, while it's a pretty good looking profile, it's not that complicated. Here we have an image, and it's just a RAW file from an XT3. And you can look here if I'm in Capture One, XT3 generic, and here it's on auto. This is just a straight out of camera RAW file. Now, if I'm making presets, I'll usually use Film Standard. But in this case, I want to reference because the XT3 is one of the few cameras that you can apply the native classic negative look from phase one that's in Capture One. You could also shoot a native JPEG, I believe only on the X Pro 3 right now, but if you had a native JPEG and a RAW, now you have reference material. That's the key if you really want to match something. Okay, so I'm gonna apply classic negative to this one, and there it is, that's classic negative. The problem is, if I go to another file, like this file from the XE3, it's not available, because this is an ICC profile for a specific camera, and it's locked out of the other ones. And we can do better with a style slash preset slash LUT because it becomes more versatile. We can even edit this video with a LUT. After we make the presets, we'll use a LUT converter like this one right here. Once we get it all dialed in Capture One and Lightroom and we have those presets, we can actually generate a reference file from a LUT generator like this one here, and then we can save it as a LUT as well. That's a video for another day, but it is fairly straightforward. It just takes a little bit of time. Here's our classic negative. Here's a copy of it in the RAW, and you can see no changes. It's native here. I'm going to change this to Film Standard. When I'm making a preset in Lightroom or style in Capture One, I'm going to use a standardized color profile that works across the board. Meaning, for example, if I chose a Fuji reference as a baseline, now if I went to apply this to a Canon file, it wouldn't work because Canon files don't have those same baselines. Film Standard is available across all. It's basically like the standard color, like Adobe RGB or something like that in Lightroom. And it's a standardized baseline. So I make all my styles based on that for consistency. So they work on all file types. Now all I have to do at this point is go into my editor. Now this is where it takes a long time, but the key is the colors, the curves, and of course, the color editor, the advanced color editor. We can select any color. We can change the range. It's so much more powerful in Capture One than in Lightroom, but we can do this in Lightroom as well and get it beautifully close. But it is a little easier to control all those dynamics, right? Drop the green saturation a little bit. The hue on Classic Negative is really shifted toward the greens and away from the yellows, but the saturation should be dropped a little.
On digital, greens tend to be really bright, really saturated, and that can be great. I'm not saying don't ever use that, but with films, for whatever reason, the way chemicals and silver and all that kind of stuff work, greens tended to be more subdued. And the truth is, if you look around in the real world, I think that the subdued greens are more natural. If you look around in the real world, I find that greens to our eyes tend to be a little darker, a little richer, but also a little more desaturated than oftentimes we get in a digital camera. And I think it's really easy to overprocess the greens. So when I started making accurate film presets and studying films and all the stuff that went with that, I realized there's a lot to be said for the greens. It doesn't mean they're the same in all films. Like, I had to do them differently for every film I made. And for Classic Negative, the greens need to be done a certain way.
Let's actually look, though, at the shortcut. I already have a preset made that I spent, I don't know, I probably spent 8 or 10 hours making these presets. So let's go to my presets. And here is Classic Negative right here in my Filmist. So I could apply all kinds of different looks, but here's the Classic Negative. And look, you can download this in the comments of the video for free for Capture One, for Lightroom, and for a lot, and then you can tinker with this yourself, so you don't have to start all this from scratch. But now we go to that Advanced Color Editor, and we see all these changes. This is where I start. Advanced Color Editor, or in Lightroom in the HSL Editor, is where I'm going to start. If I switch to Lightroom, you'll see here, let's go to the same one. Again, I've applied the Classic Negative preset to it, and I have a reference JPEG exported with the actual Classic Negative profile from phase one, from Capture One. Okay, so, and you can see here all these settings in HSL on this, and the same in here, all these settings in Advanced Color Editor, which can actually be way more precise. You can see that aside from just the basic red, green, blue, yellow, magenta, all of those, I actually went in here and I have all these little custom profiles I took to try and make it work. So it didn't just look good on this one image. A great preset or a style has to work on all of them. And so if I want to go and apply Classic Negative to a completely different color scene, a completely different image, it has to look good, right? It has to come out very close. Let's apply it natively here on this one. And here's the Classic Negative preset version. Very tiny, subtle differences, but it's so close, you're not even going to notice. It gives us that superior look. And so what I'm going to do, if I'm really trying to be precise and make a versatile tool, is I'm going to test. I'm going to have a baseline image like this one. I'm going to tweak with the colors. You can see the greens. I told you greens were really important. The saturation is dropped. The hue is significant. This is going to vary depending on what look you want, but the greens here are very distinctive. Watch if I just turn off, if I reset just the color editor and nothing else, boom. That color editor alone gave us the primary look, but then we also went into the curves. We went into the Luma curve, the RGB curve, the red curve, tweaking the tone, right? We're tweaking the tone with the RGB and Luma curves, but you can also go in Lightroom or in Capture One and do those specific curve adjustments on the color. So left is dark, right is light, and we can increase or decrease the red, green, blue channels respectively to get the look we want. And you can see if I go over here to Lightroom, I did the same thing. I worked with HSL first, then I went to the RGB curve. You can click this little button down here to exit the sliders. I'll use sliders as a reference in Lightroom. Then I'll start manually tweaking this curve very subtly, but then you can also see that I can use the color curves. And so if I need a little more, if I need a darken and shift, I'll use those two tools primarily, the curves and the advanced color. And yes, of course, I'll use sliders, I'll use clarity, shadow, highlight, all these things to get the overall look just right across all of my test images. It's a balancing act. However, those color tools are really what you want to spend some time with.
Red, green, and blue. And I think when working with an image, when working with a filmic look, the green is one of the most important spectrums that I deal with. You have to balance them all, but if the greens aren't right, everything else falls apart, the red, the blues. And so you're balancing a lot of times green with red, with blue. But blue is something that I think is a little more stable. The reds and the greens are a lot more variable. And if you look across different film types, you'll see a huge range of how reds and greens are interpreted. And that's one of the keys you have to look at. A lot of times I think people are afraid to try changing colors too much because they're like, well, I want it to be natural. But what we don't realize, and that the film designers did realize, is natural is relative. We don't even all see color the same way. Color changes when different light spectrums hit it. As the sun sets here, the color on these greens is more yellow than it will be when it's behind the hill. You have white balance factors to consider. There's all these things to work with. A great style in digital should leave the white balance alone. A lot of us are using auto white balance like I'm using on this video right now, and usually it works pretty good. Of course, with film, we didn't have that. Almost all the film was balanced to daylight, and then we had other specialty films for other things. But if we shot a daylight balanced film in daylight light like this, and then we shot that same film under fluorescent or tungsten, or even when the sun went down, the color renditions would be different. When I make a preset of any style, I leave the white balance alone, and I assume that it's either where you want it or you can tweak it a little warmer or a little cooler to match the white balance of that scene. When I'm adjusting color to make a filmic, I'm not adjusting white balance, I'm adjusting the subtlety of hues, saturations, curves, red, green, and blue channels, and all the things that affect the very subtle nuances of a color.
And there's no magic formula I can give you. You really are going to have to tinker around the greens, the yellows. You got to think about how they're connected, how hard the edges are. In Capture One, we can control the softness. We can control what's considered yellow and what's considered orange. So these are things that you can look more into at a later time. But the bottom line is you need that refinement, and just tweak with it. Tweak with it until it feels right. If you're trying to match something like a film, the best way to do it is to have an actual image taken on film and an image taken in the same spot on digital. I did a lot of that when I created Filmist, so I could really get those natural film looks, and then I would test them on dozens of images to make sure they worked, to make sure they were as consistent as possible. And that is how we get that film look. And you can see that once we have it, once we have the preset, it's easy. I can go back to this XE3 file now that I couldn't apply it to because it's a camera that it's not compatible with. And if you look at my settings, I'm still on film standard. I've brought out that characteristic green and that full classic negative look by applying the style. I can take this DNG file from a Sony camera, I believe this is. And again, I can apply that classic negative look. Let's go in, turn the exposure up a little bit. Here's a Canon file. Let's go to the presets. And you can see I have lots of presets in here from Filmist that I can kind of browse over and choose. But here's our classic negative, just like that. And depending on the profile of the film, sometimes you'll want to tweak with your exposure a little bit, and sometimes you'll want to tweak with your white balance a little bit.
In quality filmic styles and in film profiles, and I think this is one of the reasons Fuji has garnered so much attention, because most people don't really understand how film works and why it looks so good. Fuji, of course, their heritage is in film. So they make these film profiles, and it's not that these film profiles are inherently complex. They're emulating digitally what took years to achieve chemically, but what frankly is not difficult to achieve digitally. And I'm not knocking Fuji's film profiles. Fuji are historical masters of film, and they make beautiful film profiles, but sometimes the way they're applied are limiting, and we can change that. And as you look around here, you see how the light changes in every direction, but you can see greens, and you can see blues in the sky behind me, and you can see the golds and the oranges on the trees and the leaves. And what a great film profile does is it's not afraid to, number one, manipulate those colors a little bit, but number two, to do it in a way that has subtlety and that works very versatilely. It was with digital, oftentimes with digital effects, one effect looks terrible on one image and great on another image. Whereas with film, there was a lot fewer films than there were digital effects. Film, generally speaking, is optimized, even though it may be optimized for one type of subject or one type of work. film tends to work on a lot of different things, and we would choose a film based on that. All right, guys, hope you enjoyed. Let me know what you think. If you liked it, hit that like, subscribe button, leave a comment, and of course, you can go to the comments of the video. I will put a link where you can download these styles for Lightroom, for Capture One, for LUT, over on my blog. And of course, if you like the filmic looks and you want more, you could also check out my Filmist pack and the other collections that I make. But play with those colors, play with those film looks, see what you can come up with, and let me know your favorites. All right, peace.